In today's video, we'll explore criminals who ended up devoured by nature's most dangerous creatures, from Brazil's rivers where a thief vanished beneath feeding fish, to India's forests where a tiger struck down a poacher. But first, in Yucatan, a break-in ended with a swarm no one could escape. It was September 18, 2015, on the scrubby outskirts of Mérida, Yucatan, where citrus groves pressed against abandoned shacks and storage sheds. The sun had dropped an hour earlier, leaving heavy heat and a few sodium lamps buzzing above a dirt lane. Javier Romero was 32, a small-time burglar who drifted between odd jobs and short stints in county lockup. He knew which properties sat vacant after harvest, and which doors could be pried without drawing attention. Scrap metal and old tools were his usual targets, moved to a cash-only broker who asked no questions. Neighbors described him as reliable in his own way, punctual, sober, careful. That caution was what sent him toward the shack by the orchards that night. Empty buildings meant wire, copper, roofing tin, light, sellable, fast. He planned the work like he always did. He brought a flathead screwdriver, an 8-inch pry bar, and a painter's dust mask, which he used when crawling under floors. He expected rodents, maybe a snake, never anything that fought back in numbers. He would slip in, pull the cable from the wall, and check the stack of roof panels in the back room. Pepper spray sat in his pocket for strays. He had done this for years and thought quiet speed solved most problems. The lane behind the shack was ankle-deep dust, the air smelling of citrus and old fuel. Somewhere close, a hum ran through the night. Not loud, just background noise groves carry after dark. Africanized honeybees had built a comb in the rafters, where heat and shelter suited them. Tens of thousands can fit in a space the size of a small closet. Their defensive response is fast and coordinated. Disturbance near an entrance can send hundreds into the air within seconds, concentrating stings on the head and upper body. Venom potency is ordinary, but numbers change the math. To the face, throat, and airways, dose is everything. Warnings were there if someone looked. Orchard hands avoided the shack after being driven off in past seasons. A municipal notice, faded, tacked to a fence post, mentioned bees but was half torn and unreadable at night. Two teenagers cutting across the grove toward a bus stop watched Javier hop the low chain and step onto the porch with his tools under his shirt. They slowed when the hum strengthened, a steady vibration more like machinery than a single insect. Javier set the pry bar in the swollen door seam and leaned. The wood popped with a hollow knock that echoed inside. A small ribbon of insects drifted from a gap in the screen. He pressed again. The latch tore free. The door swung open. The sound changed at once, a roar that filled the doorway. The teenagers stayed behind a citrus tree, peering through leaves and arguing in low voices about whether to get help. The first surge dropped from the rafters above the entrance, a sheet of bees lifting and falling together. They struck his hair and ears. He swiped by reflex. Stings landed around his eyes, under the collar, along the jaw. He pulled the dust mask tight, though it did little to block insects. Bees crawled beneath the edges, and the cluster shifted to the exposed cheeks and lips. Witnesses later described a staggering sidestep, like a boxer slipping punches nobody else could see. He stepped off the porch into the lane. The bees followed as a tight cloud that pulsed with his movement. Water would not have helped. There was none nearby. Running does not break pursuit in the first minute of a triggered colony. He stripped off his shirt and used it like a brush, but cloth pinned insects to his skin. Each second added dose. The hum thickened until the night itself seemed to vibrate. Field hands already working near the grove heard the noise and began toward it with the calm urgency of people used to hazards. One carried a sack of smoldering husks, orchard smoke for managing box hives, but the still night air kept the smoke from drifting far. The teenagers, still roughly 30 yards away, saw Javier drop to a knee and rise, arms pumping, footsteps skidding in powdery dirt. He cut toward the grove, then veered back to the open lane, as if searching for emptier air. The last sprint lasted less than half a minute. He managed roughly 100 feet before his pace broke, the swarm thickening around his head and shoulders. He bent, hands on thighs, then rolled to his side, knees up. The swarm noise covered the small sounds beneath. By the time the field hands reached him with smoke, movement had narrowed to the quick jerk of fingers and a shallow tilt of the chest. Smoke pushed a hole in the air. The swarm loosened, lifting and thinning, some settling on the eaves, some circling in a high ring above the lane. Javier lay on his back, chest rising in rapid, shallow pulls. Stings had swollen into tight clusters across his forehead and neck. His lips were thick, eyes nearly closed. The workers brushed the last insects away carefully, trying not to press them into his skin, and dragged him into the open lane where what little air moved could reach him. A neighbor arrived with a pickup and a tarp. They lifted him onto the bed. There was no ambulance close, and cell reception in the groves was unsteady. The teenagers stood by the fence as the truck idled and then rolled forward, slow over ruts, the driver trying to keep dust from the man on the tarp. He was pronounced dead later that night at a city clinic. The report noted extensive envenomation and airway swelling. In the morning, authorities pulled down the shack. Inside the rafters hung a wide lattice of comb, brewed heavy and warm to the touch. Near the doorway lay a dropped pry bar and a dust mask with a torn strap. In the lane, a single shoe was found with laces ripped free. Javier's phone contained a short audio recording. A hollow knock, then a rising roar, followed by a distorted rush of sound, the microphone struggling to capture the swarm's noise. The swarm in Yucatan showed how small creatures can overwhelm by sheer numbers. But in Brazil's rivers, danger comes from beneath the surface, fast, silent, and impossible to shake once it finds you. It was April 9th, 2016, on the banks of the Rio Cuiabá in Mato Grosso, Brazil. The evening air hung heavy with humidity, the river running high from recent rains, its current sliding fast along the mud-slick shoreline. One restless drifter was caught often for theft and fistfights. Paulo Silva was 27 years old. He had no steady work, though he tried hauling goods at the market on fair days. On this evening, he had made a poor attempt to steal a motorbike left outside a small repair shop. The owner's shouts drew neighbors, and Paulo found himself running on the dirt road, 3 men chasing close behind. He had no plan beyond speed, no clear direction except going away. Paulo's choices led him toward the riverbank. He had used it before as a hiding place, cutting through reeds to circle back toward town after a theft. The fisherman knew him by sight. He carried nothing in his hands this time, no tool, no bag, just sweat and panic. His thinking was simple. Water could break the line of sight, could carry him downstream beyond his pursuer's reach. It was a gamble, but one he had taken in lesser waters before. The river was wide here, about 100 yards across. The opposite bank lined with reeds and small trees. Men were fishing with hand lines and buckets, watching the commotion grow on the far side. The surface rippled unevenly, dark patches rolling beneath. This was not calm, dry season water. It was swollen, fast, and alive with things stirred by the rains. Piranhas were part of these waters, as common as the mud banks themselves. Red-bellied piranhas, averaging a foot long, gather in shoals that can number in the hundreds. They are not constant killers. Most days they scavenge, feeding on insects, fish, or carrion, but they are opportunistic, drawn to blood or frantic splashing. In flooded seasons, when the river pushes fish and animals into tight spaces, their feeding turns sharper. Locals learn young not to wade when schools gather near the banks. A boy near the road shouted for Paulo not to go in, that the current was bad and the water unsafe. The fishermen on the far side had already noticed unusual movement near the shallows, small fish breaking the surface, a ripple that did not match the current. Paulo either did not hear or did not believe them. The voices behind him were closer, and the water seemed like the only route open. He slid down the bank, mud smearing his legs, and dove headlong. He came up thrashing, head bobbing, arms churning against the current. He tried to shout back at the men chasing him, but his words broke in the spray. The fishermen saw him veer sideways almost instantly, his kicks uneven. A stain spread around him, faint at first, then clouded red. He slapped at the surface as if pushing something off his legs. The watchers on shore began to yell, waving their arms, but the noise of the water swallowed their warnings. The attack happened in seconds, but felt much longer. Paulo's movements grew frantic, his shoulders rolling as he tried to keep his face above water. The shoal concentrated near his thighs, dark bodies breaking the surface. His screams cut short, swallowed by the river as he went under. He came up once more, chest arched, arms clawing at nothing. The fisherman saw water churned and frothed, then flashes of scale, then only his mouth open in silence before it sank. The river settled back to ripples and the drifting stain. Pieces of cloth floated free, part of a shirt, a scrap of fabric, moving downstream. On the bank, the pursuers stopped short, stunned. They shouted into the water, but there was no answer, no further trace beyond the eddies. The fishermen did not enter. Experience told them the danger was not gone. They waited until the current smoothed, then marked the place with a cut branch. For hours, the water carried signs: a fragment of shoe, a thread of cloth, but not the man himself. By late afternoon, locals retrieved what little remained, caught on a snag along the bank. A small bundle of bone and cloth was carried back to town, wrapped in sacking. No procession followed. He was placed in an unmarked grave at the edge of the cemetery, the service held by a clerk more out of form than grief. The only public record came as a single line in the regional police report, a note that a man had died in the river during flight from a theft. Where water stripped a life to fragments, the jungle carried its own price. In the tall grass by the paddies, something coiled low, waiting for movement in the dark. It was July 14th, 2017, in a farming village on Sulawesi, Indonesia. Night pressed over the rice paddies, warm and wet, the footpaths between fields carrying only frogs and moving water. A man was hiding from a robbery gone violent 2 valleys away. Agus Wirawan was 40 years old. He kept ahead of police by staying forgettable, sleeping in sheds, trading quiet labor for food, stealing when he had to. People described him as careful and light on his feet, a man who watched before he moved. He traveled at night, spoke little, and slipped out before anyone felt sure they had seen him. For 2 weeks he used these paddies, camping at a tree line where jungle pushed into the fields. He carried a small pack, a cheap flashlight, and a belt knife that cut rope better than wood. Villagers saw him cross the levee after midnight and lift a sack of rice from an unlocked store hut. He kept to margins and tall grass. Habits like those had kept him free. They also put him where animals live. The fields lay in a grid of ankle-deep water with raised dikes between. Canals edged the plots, slow and brown, choked by weeds and leaf trash from the storm. Beyond the outer levee, the ground rose into scrub and banana, then thicker trees. Crickets marked the hour. A thin fog hung low over the wettest ground and hid movement more than it revealed it. Reticulated pythons worked those margins. Adults commonly reach 15 to 20 feet and can weigh more than 150 pounds. They lie coiled beside cover, anchored to roots or brush. The strike is fast, teeth recurve to hold, and the body folds into wraps by reflex. Constriction does not stop by crushing bone. It stops blood flow and breathing, working in minutes. When the prey turns still, the snake aligns the body and swallows head first, jaw ligaments and skin stretching while throat muscles walk the weight down. After a large meal, a python moves slowly and seeks cover or water until digestion lightens the load. Earlier that week, chickens went missing from a shed near the tree line. Drag marks showed along a wet path. A boy in town said he saw something thick slide across a ditch at dusk. Adults treated it as normal for the season. After the storm loosened doors and latches, 2 farmers began night patrols to deter theft. They carried headlamps and short poles, useful for dogs and drunks and, if needed, to tap the ground ahead. A goose left his shelter after midnight, taking a route he knew by feel: levee, hut, levee again, then along the ditch under bananas. He kept the light low. The patrolmen were half a field away, their lamps faint. A cloud passed over the moon and the paddies went dim. He slipped the hut latch with wire, heaved a half sack to his shoulder, and stepped back into grass. From the ditch came a sound like a wet rope dragging over wood. He paused, then moved faster. The farmers heard one short shout and stopped to listen. Something heavy worked in the grass ahead to their right, followed by a thudding rustle that made the rice stalks shiver. They angled toward it with their lights down to keep footing. The grass bent in a slow circle. For a second it looked like a man wrestling a tarp. Then their beams caught the pattern of scales, and the pale underside of a body looped over itself. Agus lay on his side, half off the levee, a coil cinched around hips and chest. The sack floated in ditch water. His knife hand clawed at the loop, but could not get under it. Pressure came on like a belt tightened one click at a time, each exhale leaving less room to refill. He kicked and rolled, which let the snake wrap again. His free arm went to his throat. In the beam, the body looked thicker than a man's thigh where it crossed his waist. The head struck at his shoulder, teeth hooking cloth and skin to pull alignment. The wrap shifted higher, ribs creaking under load. His movements dropped from frantic to mechanical, fingers pushing, feet scraping, eyes fixed on nothing. The farmers shouted and stepped in with poles, then stopped as every motion on the ground made the coils cinch tighter. The python's body worked like a pump, pressure and release in quick cycles that narrowed with time. Minutes passed in hard pieces. The tail braced in ditch roots. The men tried to pry a loop with poles from a reach, but there was no leverage, and the head struck at wood with a dull knock. When Agus went still, the wraps held for a long count, then eased a fraction. The head pressed along his face and chest, testing angles. The jaw stretched over scalp and forehead. The snake's skin slid forward while teeth set a new grip. The long body shifted in slow waves, like fabric worked over a shape. The swallowing took time. Head and shoulders disappeared first, the jaw stepping over each rise. The snake paused to adjust, muscles bunched behind the skull, then pushed again. The only sounds were water ticking in the ditch and the men's breathing. After the chest passed the mouth, the rest moved faster. The snake worked the weight down by inches, long body flexing, ribs flaring and relaxing. At the hips it slowed again, then resumed. At last the legs slid away and the coils eased into long, slack loops across the grass. By the time other villagers arrived with torches, there was no man to save. A long, distended shape lay behind the levee, the snake's sides moving with slow breaths. It shifted at their approach and slid toward thicker cover with the heavy, deliberate motion of a full animal. No one stepped in front of it. They followed at a distance until it vanished into scrub. 2 days later, the same patrolman saw the python near the paddies, sluggish and swollen. A mud line dried along its flank. Forest officers were called from town. They used poles and a noose, pinned the head, and dispatched the animal with care to avoid tearing. A knife opened the belly along a seam. Inside lay Agus, head to toe, folded only where the path had demanded it. His belt knife was unsheathed near one ankle. His flashlight sat in grass where the first coil had taken him. The report listed a reticulated python about 18 feet long and heavy enough that 4 men were needed to lift it for the cut. The villagers burned the offal in a pit and washed the ditch with buckets. By evening, only a trampled patch of grass and a stripped length of levee showed what had happened. Where silence killed in coils, the North told a louder story. Splintered wood, falling iron, and a bear forcing its way inside. It was November 17th, 2013, outside Haines, Alaska. A skim of new ice edged the Chilkat River, while light snow sifted through spruce and alder. A man was wanted for burglary and a parole violation. Daniel Kincaid was 44 years old. He had drifted between logging sites and short-haul trucking until jobs thinned, and he slipped off the map. He knew how to move between shuttered cabins after the season, fixing a hinge here, taking a little fuel there, leaving just enough order that no one looked too close. People who crossed him called him careful more than brave. He traveled light and watched before he moved. Food and fuel set his limits. A storm the week prior had stranded him shy of town and stripped his pack. He slid a screwdriver under a loose back window, eased the frame, and stepped into the cold dark. He bled the stove line, set a skillet, and thawed a can of stew to save on wood. He meant to eat, sleep a short turn, and cut for the highway after midnight. What he could not control was scent, fat, and steam pouring up the flue into black timber. A mile away, 2 deer hunters picked along a cut bank toward their truck, headlamps half covered to keep night vision. In fresh powder, they had noticed human tracks headed for the cabin, and behind them, a single set of larger prints with long claw marks. They talked quietly about trespassers and late bears, and decided to swing by the place on their way out. The wind carried a thin ribbon of food smell along the drainage. The valley showed signs locals recognized. Willow tips were clipped. A stump lay shredded where something had dug for roots. Scat sat rinded with ice and packed with berries. In lean autumns, grizzly sows den late. A female that has not put on enough fat keeps feeding into November. A sow can weigh 300 to 500 pounds and run 30 to 35 miles an hour in short bursts. Claws longer than 2 inches open logs and meat. A nose that strong pulls scent from miles off. A warm cabin leaking stew is a clear signal in cold air. Near the trees, a bait barrel was hammered flat on one side, fresh dirt thrown in a fan. By the porch, a broad pad angled straight to the door. Inside, Daniel added a splash of stove fuel and cracked the door to vent smoke. Snow hissed on the pipe. He did not register the new track crossing the yard or the dark shape that stopped beside the wall and tested the seam around the latch. The first sound he noticed was a heavy scrape on the door, then a shove that flexed the hasp. The panel swung open 6 inches and hit the safety chain. He stood, grabbed his worn .22 from the table and took half a step. The bear surged again. The screws tore free. The bear shouldered into the room, nose low to the boards. The table moved and the skillet slid off the stove into the snow. The first strike was weight, not teeth. A forepaw hit Daniel at the hip and lifted him, chair and all, into the wall. He tried to stand and another blow crossed his ribs. Outside, the hunters heard two heavy thuds and one short shout. One man stepped toward the door and froze as the bear hit again, short and fast. Daniel fired once into the ceiling. The sow's head snapped to the sound. She closed and took his forearm. Pressure crushed down and the pistol clattered across the floor. She worked him with the efficiency of a hungry animal guarding food. Short rakes and bites meant to disable, then claim. The stove threw low arcs across fur and plywood. Daniel tried to crawl. She planted a paw between his shoulders and pinned him. Cloth tore. Bone made a flat sound under load. She shifted her grip high on his arm and shoulder and dragged him toward the open door, backing a step at a time to the threshold. The hunters moved to the window and shouted, then fired a warning into the snow beside the porch. The sow paused, mouth wet, and turned her head, but did not bolt. Warmth and smell held her. She backed through the doorway, pulling Daniel across the sill. His boots left a wavering line in the snow. A second warning shot cracked and rolled down valley. She flinched, tightened, and hauled him into the yard. Snow turned their lamps to fog. The bear dragged him toward brush, stopping to bite when he kicked. Each stop left a deeper stain, long smears broken by boot prints. The hunters kept distance and circled to the side, yelling to split her attention without drawing a charge. She reached the cut bank and pulled him over the lip. They heard a drop and a grunt, then alder snapping. The hunters looked down and saw the bear hunched over Daniel's body, feeding with steady grunts and tearing sounds. Through the branches they caught glimpses of its back, a paw braced, and the shake of its head as it worked. They held their rifles but didn't fire, knowing a wounded bear in tight brush would be even more dangerous. The metallic smell of blood drifted up as the valley grew quiet, broken only by the river under ice. Realizing there was nothing they could do, they backed into the yard, secured the cabin door, and left behind a scene marked by blood and drag lines. Authorities snowshoed in the next day. The yard was a churn of tracks, blood, and shredded cloth. Below the bank lay bone fragments and heavier pieces packed in snow. The search line followed drag marks into timber and lost them in blowdown. The bear was not found. In spring, hikers discovered a boot with bones still inside near a frozen side channel and brought it to town. The report listed a probable grizzly sow, late to den, drawn by cooking odor. Victim identified by dental work and a parole file. A cabin torn apart by hunger. A continent away, the same need for meat slid through grass, unstoppable. It was March 8, 2018, inside Pinch Tiger Reserve in Madhya Pradesh, India. The dry season was tightening, and the teak forest stood bare, its leaves brittle underfoot. A man worked odd jobs at farms along the highway, repairing tools, driving bullock carts, and collecting scraps of wood for cooking fires. Rancho Kumar was 36 years old. His father had cut bamboo and thatch before him, and Rancho had grown up knowing which forest paths carried risk, but money was never enough. With a wife and 2 children and debts owed to shopkeepers, he agreed to join 2 others in laying crude snares for deer near the reserve fence. Venison could be sold quietly. Skins and antlers carried higher value still. This was not his first time stepping across wire, but he knew the danger. Forest guards had posted notices, warning that night patrols and camera traps were active. Locals often said tigers here hunted trespassers, and 3 men moving with lights after dusk drew attention. Rancho trusted that numbers made them safer. He carried a loop of steel cable, a length of rope, and a torch held low to the ground. His partners moved ahead, muttering about where to place the first snare. The reserve around them was dry forest broken by tall grasses and thorn scrub. The air carried dust and the smell of old fires. Cicadas whirred, and every step broke leaves that had fallen and crisped under sun. The moon sat low, clouded by smoke from field burning at the edge of the villages. The tiger that lived here was a male in its prime, near 9 feet from nose to tail, and weighing close to 450 pounds. Tigers in Pinch are ambush hunters, moving low through grass and striking at close range with bursts of 30 to 40 miles per hour. Their forelimbs carry dense muscle built for grappling, claws nearly 4 inches long driving into hide. A single bite to the neck or throat is enough to collapse prey heavier than a man. Unlike leopards, they do not drag kills up trees but into grass or cover, feeding over hours while returning to the carcass until it is stripped. Forest guards had reported a tiger prowling near farm boundaries. and farmers said cattle taken from the edge of fields had been found half-eaten in thickets. Rancho had heard these stories, but treated them as routine. Many nights ended with nothing more than silence and the trek home. This time, the men crossed further in, ignoring the shiver of cattle lowing from distant sheds. The farmers who watched from across the fence muttered that it was foolishness, but did not intervene. Near midnight, the men set their first snare at a game trail. Rancho bent low to secure the loop against a stake, fumbling with rope. His partners whispered sharply and turned their beams back toward the trees. Branches broke, followed by a low growl rolling across the clearing, deep and short, the kind of sound only a big cat makes. The men froze. The farmers on the outer path later told officials they heard shouting, followed by heavy crashing through brush. The tiger came fast, covering the distance in a few leaps. Witnesses described it as sudden. Light beams cut across fur and then vanished as bodies scattered. Rancho did not run quickly enough. The tiger struck from the side, the impact snapping him off his feet. He shouted once before the sound broke into a cough. The claws tore into his back and ribs as he rolled. The others fled, their lights swinging wildly as they crashed toward the fence. Behind them came the growl of the cat, low but rising as it worked its grip. The farmers hid in shadow and heard the sound of weight dragged through grass. The cry that had started high flattened into silence. All that carried afterward was the rumble of the animal moving into cover, branches snapping under weight, and then stillness. The tiger fed with the patience of its kind, dragging the body into high grass where it was partially consumed. No one approached that night. The men who escaped did not go to the police, fearing charges as much as the tiger. The farmers kept mostly silent too, but later spoke quietly to rangers about the lights and the noise, enough for the story to enter reserve files. At dawn, rangers traced the scene. They found drag marks across the trail, blood spread in arcs, and a broken snare half buried in soil. A torch lay cracked in the dust. In the grass, they found scraps of cloth and one shoe, torn and soaked. They followed the drag marks until they ended in a tangle too dense to enter safely. 2 days later, a patrol recovered more. Bones scattered, a spine partially stripped, cloth wound around branches. The report logged it in reserve files, marked as poaching incident and predation. It was not carried to major papers, only a line in local records. To the people near Pench, it was no surprise. Farmers spoke again of what they always had, that the forest guards itself, and those who enter at night, are judged by more than men. Thanks for tuning in. If you're ready, the next story is waiting on the end screen, another encounter with the unexpected on Animal Quest.